In the high Andes, the voices of the executed were never silent. They lived on through instruments crafted from their own bones. Echoing warnings of rebellion through ceremonial music, during the 16th century, an Andean king combined strict governance with ritualized punishment. Rebels and traitors faced execution, and their remains were transformed into bone flutes. In the highlands of the Andes, during the early 16th century, a local warlord rose to prominence among several small tribes. His family lineage traced back to a long line of regional chieftains who had maintained relative control over the valleys and plateaus. This chieftain inherited both authority and military experience, learning the strategies of governance from his father. He studied the movements of rival tribes and cultivated alliances through arranged marriages and tribute exchanges. By the time he reached adulthood, he had established himself as a capable military leader. Several minor conflicts with neighboring clans tested his leadership, and his success in these skirmishes earned him widespread respect. His political acumen was evident in how he balanced the interests of various factions. He encouraged local communities to contribute labor and resources to the construction of roads and terraces, which increased agricultural productivity. Religious legitimacy played a crucial role in his consolidation of power. He positioned himself as a favored intermediary between the people and the regional deities, attending rituals and sponsoring festivals that reinforced his authority. The warlord understood the symbolic importance of the mountains. He initiated ceremonies that honored peaks and river sources, connecting his rule to natural landmarks considered sacred by his subjects. His early reign was marked by the expansion of controlled territory. Neighboring tribes were either integrated through treaties or subdued in carefully executed military campaigns. The king emphasized strategic conquest rather than total annihilation, preferring to incorporate skilled warriors into his own forces. Administrative structures under his leadership became increasingly sophisticated. Taxation systems were formalized, and local leaders were appointed to oversee tribute collection and compliance with royal decrees. The king also prioritized intelligence gathering. Scouts were deployed across distant valleys to monitor potential uprisings and report unusual movements. This network allowed him to respond swiftly to threats before they escalated. In trade, he sought both practical and symbolic benefits. Markets were established in central plazas, facilitating the exchange of goods while simultaneously reinforcing the presence of his authority in daily life. Military organization under his rule became highly structured. Units were assigned specific roles such as scouts, archers, and infantry, with clear hierarchies and training routines designed to maintain discipline and readiness. The king invested in both offensive and defensive architecture. Fortified settlements and watchtowers dotted key passes, ensuring rapid communication and a buffer against potential invaders. He maintained careful records of both resources and personnel. Scribes were tasked with documenting tax contributions, crop yields, and military inventories. These records supported decisions in governance and military campaigns. Religious rituals were not only ceremonial, but also functional. The king's sponsorship of offerings and sacrifices reinforced social cohesion and the perceived legitimacy of his rule, deterring rebellion through spiritual authority. Education of elite youth became another priority. Sons of prominent families were taught history, strategy, and governance, ensuring that future leaders would be loyal and competent. Agricultural innovations were encouraged under his reign. New irrigation techniques and terrace-building methods increased food production, allowing larger populations to be sustained under central control. He also initiated labor rotations, which assigned community members to work on public projects, both reinforcing infrastructure and demonstrating the practical benefits of his leadership. The king cultivated a reputation for wisdom and counsel. Advisors were consulted regularly, and decisions were often made collectively to maintain stability and prevent alienation among influential figures. His reign coincided with a period of relative climatic stability, which he leveraged to expand agricultural output. Surplus resources were stored strategically to withstand potential droughts or shortages. Diplomacy extended beyond immediate neighbors. Envoys were sent to distant valleys and plateaus, establishing trade routes and mutual defense pacts that enhanced the king's influence over a broad region. He was attentive to the morale of his people. Festivals and celebrations were scheduled around planting and harvest cycles, ensuring that social rituals reinforced communal identity and loyalty to the crown. Military discipline was strictly enforced. Soldiers were expected to adhere to codes of conduct, and infractions were met with penalties that emphasized the importance of cohesion and obedience in the cities and villages under his control. Construction projects reflected both functionality and the projection of power. Storage facilities, ceremonial centers, and defensive walls were built using locally sourced materials, with skilled labor organized by state authorities. He also oversaw the standardization of weights and measures, facilitating trade and ensuring fairness in the marketplace. This reduced disputes and increased confidence in economic transactions. The king's court became a center for cultural and intellectual activity. Artisans, musicians, and poets were invited to contribute to ceremonies, creating a shared identity that reinforced loyalty to his rule. Infrastructure development was coordinated to serve both economic and military purposes. Roads connected remote settlements to administrative hubs, enabling rapid troop movement and resource distribution. He monitored the performance of local officials closely. Regular audits ensured that appointed leaders were both competent and loyal, reducing the likelihood of corruption or insubordination. The king's influence extended into religious hierarchies. High priests were expected to support royal edicts, and temple ceremonies were often aligned with state objectives. Legal systems were formalized under his authority. Codes of conduct were established, and punishments for crimes were clearly defined, creating predictable social structures and discouraging unrest. His reign also focused on territorial integration. Conquered villages were incorporated through policies that allowed local leaders to retain some authority while pledging loyalty to the crown. Strategic marriages were employed as tools of diplomacy. Daughters and sons were married into neighboring tribes to secure alliances, blending political objectives with social and cultural cohesion. The king maintained a balance between central authority and local autonomy. While major decisions were centralized, day-to-day management of communities remained in local hands, creating a functional and stable governance system. Religious symbolism reinforced military achievements. Victories were commemorated with ceremonial displays, connecting conquest to divine favor and legitimizing territorial expansion. He encouraged the cultivation of specialized crafts. Artisans producing textiles, ceramics, and metalwork contributed both to trade and to the visual representation of his authority in public spaces. The king demonstrated foresight in planning for succession. Advisors and family members were involved in discussions about future leadership to ensure continuity and prevent power struggles. Cultural integration was also part of his strategy. Tribes under his rule were encouraged to adopt common languages and rituals, fostering cohesion without erasing local traditions entirely. In summary, the Andean king's rise combined military skill, political acumen, and religious authority. Through strategic alliances, administrative innovation, and cultural integration, he established a period of stability and expansion. His reign was characterized by structured governance, disciplined military organization, and careful attention to economic and spiritual life. By the end of his early reign, the king had become an undisputed authority across the highlands, consolidating power over a diverse range of communities. His leadership methods laid the groundwork for practices that would later include rituals and punishments for those deemed rebellious, though these practices would be explored in the following episode. During the later years of his reign, the king implemented a system of punishment for individuals who resisted authority. Rebels and political opponents were carefully identified through intelligence networks and local informants. Those deemed subversive were arrested and publicly displayed before ceremonial execution. The process was highly ritualized, designed to reinforce the king's authority and demonstrate the consequences of defiance. Execution methods varied depending on the severity of the offense. Minor dissent could result in imprisonment or labor, while significant rebellion led to more permanent forms of punishment. One of the most distinctive practices involved the preparation of executed individuals' bones. After death, skeletal remains were collected and prepared for ritual use in state ceremonies. The bones were meticulously cleaned and dried. Specific long bones, such as femurs and tibias, were chosen for their structural strength and suitability for crafting musical instruments. Skilled artisans were responsible for transforming these bones into flutes. They carved the hollowed bones with precision to ensure tonal quality and functionality. Each flute required careful drilling and shaping. Artisans employed tools made of stone, obsidian, or metal to carve finger holes at calculated intervals, producing a scale that could be used in ceremonial music. The process of creating these instruments was highly controlled. Artisans worked under supervision to ensure that the flutes adhered to ritual standards and the intended symbolic purpose. Once completed, the bone flutes were ceremonially consecrated. Rituals involved offerings and prayers to the deities, believed to imbue the instruments with the spiritual essence of the deceased. The king's advisors believed that these flutes carried the voices of the executed. During ceremonies, the sound produced was interpreted as a form of spiritual communication or a warning to the living. Bone flutes were used primarily in religious festivals and state ceremonies. Their presence reinforced the link between obedience, ritual, and the king's authority over life and death. Participation in these ceremonies required trained musicians. Selected individuals learned to play specific tunes that followed established liturgical patterns and accompanied ritual movements. The music served both symbolic and functional purposes. It marked transitions in the ritual, indicated stages of ceremonial acts, and reinforced collective memory of the king's power. Execution sites were often located near ceremonial centers. This proximity allowed for the immediate collection of bones and ensured that rituals could follow swiftly after punishment. Preparation of the instruments was considered an act of devotion. Artisans and priests involved in the process were accorded status for their role in maintaining the religious and political order. Bone flutes were also used in processions. Musicians carrying the instruments would walk through settlements, broadcasting the sound as a reminder of the king's enforcement mechanisms. The ritualized nature of these punishments emphasized conformity. Communities witnessed the tangible consequences of rebellion and the perceived integration of spirits into ceremonial life. Selection of victims followed a codified procedure. Individuals were assessed based on intelligence reports, public conduct, and sometimes testimony from peers or neighbors. High-ranking officials occasionally used these flutes in private ceremonies. They were considered tools for maintaining loyalty among subordinate leaders and for reinforcing political hierarchy. Musical sequences were standardized. Each note, rhythm, and interval carried specific connotations, often aligned with mythological narratives and historical events. Training of musicians began with observation and imitation. Novices learned the correct fingering, breath control, and ceremonial timing, ensuring uniformity across performances. Bone flutes were carefully stored when not in use. They were typically kept in ceremonial chambers, often alongside other ritual paraphernalia protected by priests or court officials. The preparation of instruments required knowledge of anatomy. Artisans had to understand the structure of bones, including density, length, and curvature, to create playable flutes. The king's enforcement of this practice reflected a combination of religious belief and social control. The instruments served as both tools of remembrance and instruments of authority. Execution itself followed formalized procedures. Victims were restrained and led to designated locations where rituals were performed before final death was administered according to prescribed methods. After execution, preparation of bones was immediate. Delays were avoided to preserve the structural integrity required for instrument making and to maintain ritual continuity. Ceremonial use of bone flutes often coincided with significant dates in the Andean calendar, including solstices, harvests, and military victories. These events emphasized the king's connection to both temporal and spiritual power. Priests overseeing the rituals interpreted the sounds of the flutes. Audiences were informed of the symbolic messages contained in the music, often linking the notes to moral or political lessons. The instruments also functioned as deterrents. Hearing the music of the bone flutes in public contexts reminded citizens of the consequences of rebellion and reinforced compliance with royal edicts. Artisans and priests maintained detailed records. Documentation included the number of instruments created, the origin of the bones, and the occasions on which each flute was used in ceremonies. The flutes were not only symbolic but also practical. Their tonal properties allowed them to carry across valleys, reaching settlements distant from the ceremonial centers. The king occasionally commissioned special flutes to commemorate specific events or to honor particularly important individuals who had been executed for treason or rebellion. The process reinforced social hierarchies. Artisans, musicians, and priests occupied recognized positions within the court, while the instruments themselves became extensions of the king's authority. Knowledge of flute preparation and ceremonial use was restricted. Only those initiated into specific religious or artisan classes were permitted to participate, ensuring control over both ritual and narrative. Victims' identities were preserved in records. Names, offenses, and dates of execution were inscribed in codices, linking historical memory with ritual practice and reinforcing the moral framework of the state. The king's use of bone flutes represented a deliberate integration of punitive, spiritual, and cultural strategies. This multifaceted approach reinforced obedience while maintaining religious legitimacy. Music performed with the bone flutes was accompanied by other ritual elements, including chants, offerings, and symbolic gestures, creating a structured and highly codified ceremonial experience. The preparation and use of these instruments also influenced wider social norms, observing the consequences of rebellion and the integration of executed individuals into ritual life-shaped collective behavior. Training and production cycles were continuous. As new flutes were created, musicians were trained, rituals updated, and instruments maintained, ensuring the sustainability of the practice throughout the king's reign. In this way, the king institutionalized a system that combined execution, ritual, and music. The bone flutes became emblematic of authority and obedience, linking governance with ceremonial observance. The practice also reflected broader Andean cosmology. Incorporating human remains into musical instruments was consistent with beliefs in the permeability between the living and the spiritual world. By the end of this period, the bone flutes had become an established element of the king's governance. They were recognized symbols of punishment, loyalty, and ritual order, representing a unique intersection of politics and religious practice. The bone flutes remained central to state ceremonies throughout the king's later reign. Their sound accompanied seasonal rituals, military celebrations, and offerings to deities, reinforcing the authority of the throne. Musicians trained from youth performed regularly, ensuring that tonal patterns and ritual timing were consistent across regions. Accuracy in playing was considered essential to preserve the intended symbolic meaning. During public ceremonies, the flutes served as auditory reminders of consequences for rebellion. Communities recognized the link between the music and the executed individuals, reinforcing compliance and social order. The king's advisors continued to oversee the preparation and maintenance of the instruments. Artisans replaced damaged flutes and ensured that ceremonial quality remained consistent over time. In addition to public events, private rituals for high-ranking officials incorporated the bone flutes. These ceremonies reinforced loyalty within the court and maintained the hierarchy established by the king. The use of flutes also affected religious practice. Priests interpreted the sounds as messages from the spirits of the deceased, guiding ritual conduct and reinforcing cosmological beliefs about life, death, and authority. Over time, the instruments became symbols of both fear and cultural identity. Communities accepted their use as part of state religion, and the music of the flutes was integrated into local traditions beyond purely ceremonial functions. The king monitored the system carefully, ensuring that it maintained both its practical and symbolic effectiveness. Ceremonial schedules, musician training, and record-keeping remained tightly controlled. Even after the king's death, the instruments retained their significance. Successor leaders continued to employ the bone flutes to reinforce political and spiritual authority, demonstrating the durability of the practice. Historical accounts indicate that the practice declined gradually as social and political structures shifted. Changes in leadership, external influences, and evolving religious beliefs eventually reduced the prominence of bone flutes in state rituals. Archaeological findings confirm the existence of flutes crafted from human bones in Andean ceremonial sites. These artifacts provide insight into the intersection of governance, ritual, and music in pre-Columbian societies. The flutes serve as enduring evidence of the ways in which leadership combined coercion and religion to maintain control. Their creation and use illustrate a unique method of integrating punitive measures into ceremonial life. The legacy of the bone flutes highlights the complex relationship between ritual, authority, and society. They remain a distinctive aspect of Andean cultural history and a testament to the ingenuity and structure of ancient governance systems.